The scout ship materialized at the edge of the Galactic Alliance's central hub, its arrival so unexpected that communication protocols momentarily froze. Standard procedure dictated immediate quarantine, but there was nothing standard about this vessel. Its hull bore marks of impossible journeys, quantum fractures that should have been theoretical abstractions rather than physical scars. Quantum physicists would later spend decades trying to understand how the ship had survived what appeared to be simultaneous exposure to multiple dimensional stresses. Commander Krulax of the Alliance Interdiction Fleet was the first to receive the transmission. His tentacular appendages moved with practiced precision across the quantum resonance communication panel, expecting another routine report. What he received instead would haunt the collective consciousness of 1,000 civilizations. The pilot's communication was fragmented, a burst of data that seemed to exist between coherence and madness. Quantum encrypted packets carried not just information, but something more, an essence that defied traditional communication protocols. It was as if the transmission itself was alive, breathing with an intelligence that transcended known communication methods. "They are coming," the message began, "and nothing in your historical archives could have prepared you." The Alliance's communication analysts worked frantically. Typically, such a transmission would take standard cycles to decode. But this was different. The data seemed to decode itself, rearranging information with an almost sentient logic that bypassed traditional computational barriers. What emerged was more than a message. It was a warning, a glimpse into a potential future that challenged everything the Galactic Alliance understood about species development, technological progression, and the very nature of intelligence. The scout ship itself was an anomaly. Its quantum crystalline structure suggested technologies that existed simultaneously in multiple states, a concept so advanced that most Alliance scientists would have dismissed it as pure fantasy mere moments before. Sensors detected materials that shouldn't exist, energy signatures that violated fundamental laws of physics, and computational matrices that seemed to think rather than process. Commander Krulax watched in growing horror as the ship's systems began to interface with the Alliance's central communication network. It wasn't an invasion. It was something far more terrifying, a complete and instantaneous integration that suggested the ship itself was more than a vessel. It was a messenger, a probe, a living conduit of an intelligence beyond comprehension. The final burst of the transmission contained something unexpected. Not a threat, not a declaration of war, but a series of mathematical equations that seemed to solve multiple grand unified theory challenges that had stumped galactic scientists for millennia. It was as if the mysterious pilot was saying, "This is who we are. This is what we can do." As quickly as it had appeared, the ship began to dissolve, not through destruction, but through a process that looked more like quantum deconstruction, as if it was returning to a state of pure potential. The last visual data suggested something impossible. The ship wasn't just disappearing. It was choosing to become something else. In the silence that followed, the Galactic Alliance realized something fundamental had changed. A new variable had entered their carefully calculated galactic equation. A species that didn't conform to any known pattern of technological or cultural development. A species that would come to be known simply as humanity. And they were coming. The basement laboratory was nothing special. Concrete walls lined with mismatched shelving, outdated equipment balanced precariously on workbenches, and a climate control system that wheezed more than regulated. Dr. Lyra Chen preferred it this way, far from the sterile, politically charged research facilities that demanded conformity. Her latest project had begun as a crazy thought during a sleepless night. What if communication was more than just an exchange of words? What if it was a fundamental quantum entanglement of consciousness? Most of her colleagues had laughed. The Neural Research Board had cut her funding 3 times. Her doctoral advisor had called her work scientific fantasy bordering on mystical delusion. But Lyra understood something they didn't, that the boundaries between impossible and inevitable were far more fluid than anyone realized. The quantum neural interface looked deceptively simple, a lightweight headset with intricate crystalline circuits that seemed to shimmer between solid and liquid states. Years of research had led to this moment, a device that could potentially translate not just language, but the very essence of thought. Her first test subject was unexpected. Miguel Rodriguez, a trauma survivor with neural damage that had left traditional communication methods impossible. Where others saw a challenge, Lyra saw potential. The first connection happened accidentally. Miguel's brainwaves began to synchronize with the device in ways no one had predicted. It wasn't translation. It was something more profound. A complete sharing of experiential memory, emotional landscape, and cognitive processing. During the initial test, Miguel began to cry, not from pain, but from understanding. He could suddenly comprehend experiences he had never lived, the emotional memories of people from different cultures, different times. The quantum neural interface wasn't just breaking language barriers. It was dismantling the very concept of individual consciousness. Dr. Elena Yoshida, Lyra's primary research partner, watched the preliminary data with growing excitement. The neural mapping showed something unprecedented. The interface wasn't just reading thoughts, it was creating a quantum bridge between consciousness states. "It's like we've discovered a new sense," Elena whispered, her hands trembling as she analyzed the data. Not hearing, not seeing, something entirely new. Military representatives began showing interest, but Lyra was several steps ahead. She understood that this technology was too profound to be weaponized. It was a tool of understanding, of connection, of transcending the limitations of individual human experience. Each successful test expanded the interface's capabilities. Subjects could now experience memories not just from other humans, but from complex cognitive systems, advanced artificial intelligences, distributed neural networks, even experimental quantum computational matrices. The scientific community was divided. Some called it the greatest breakthrough in human history. Others warned of the philosophical and ethical implications of a technology that could completely dissolve the boundaries of individual identity. Lyra Chen simply smiled. She had always known that the next great human evolution wouldn't come from physical adaptation, but from our capacity to understand, truly understand, one another. And this was just the beginning. The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Ambassador Zara Rodriguez walked in. Her presence was unlike anything the assembled delegates had experienced before. No elaborate ceremonial robes, no traditional diplomatic regalia, just a simple graphene weave suit and a datapad that seemed to pulse with an almost living energy. 12 major galactic civilizations sat represented around the circular chamber. The Rigelian crystalline delegates, with their multifaceted sensory clusters. The gaseous Nebulon representatives, contained in sophisticated environmental suits. The silicon-based Krelnax, whose very molecular structure defied traditional biological understanding. Each had arrived expecting another routine diplomatic session. None were prepared for what was about to happen. Zara's smile was her first weapon. It was disarming. Not submissive, not aggressive, but something that suggested an understanding beyond mere political maneuvering. Her opening statement came not as a speech, but as a collaborative invitation. "Gentlemen, ladies, sentient beings," she began, "we're not here to negotiate. We're here to solve problems." The translation matrices worked overtime, capturing not just her words, but the subtle quantum undertones of her communication. Diplomatic protocols had always been about carefully measured language, strategic ambiguity. Zara Rodriguez was offering something entirely different. Her datapad projected a holographic display that was more than a simple presentation. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of potential solutions. Water scarcity issues that had plagued the Aridan cluster for centuries, resolved with a set of adaptive terraforming algorithms. Energy distribution conflicts between the Rigelian and Nebulon territories, neutralized by a distributed quantum energy management system. Each solution wasn't just a technical fix, it was a complete reimagining of the problem itself. Ambassador Cathax of the Centauri Confederacy leaned forward, his crystalline appendages trembling with a mixture of curiosity and barely contained anxiety. The human wasn't just presenting solutions. She was dismantling the very foundations of galactic political interaction. These proposals, Cathax interrupted, they cannot be this simple. Zara's response was a masterpiece of diplomatic judo. Instead of defending her proposals, she invited critique. Then let's break them down together, she said, her datapad already reconfiguring to allow real-time collaborative analysis. What followed was less a diplomatic meeting and more a collective problem-solving session. Delegates who had been mortal enemies for generations found themselves working together, guided by human-developed collaborative technologies that seemed to anticipate conflicts before they could emerge. The most terrifying part for the galactic representatives wasn't the solutions themselves. It was the underlying message. Humanity didn't see these as political victories. They were simply solving problems that needed solving. As the session concluded, the delegates realized something fundamental had changed. This wasn't diplomacy as they knew it. This was something else entirely, a complete reimagining of how intelligent species could interact. Zara Rodriguez packed her datapad, her smile suggesting this was just the beginning. The Galactic Council would never be the same again. Dr. Marcus Chen stood at the window of the orbital research station, watching the quantum computation matrix complete its latest cycle. What had started as a theoretical research project was now rewriting the fundamental understanding of technological progression. The breakthrough hadn't come from a single moment of inspiration. It was a cascade of innovations that seemed to build upon themselves with an almost organic momentum. Quantum computing had evolved from a promising technology to something that defied traditional computational models. In the research hub below, holographic displays danced with algorithms that seemed to predict rather than calculate. Stock markets across multiple star systems flickered in real time, their predictive models becoming so accurate that the very concept of financial speculation was transforming. Dr. Aisha Nakamura, the lead quantum systems researcher, watched in awe as the latest predictive model solved a complex economic stability problem that had challenged galactic economists for decades. The algorithm didn't just provide a solution, it provided a comprehensive framework that anticipated potential future complications with uncanny precision. It's learning, she whispered to her colleague, Dr. Rafael Santos. Not just processing, learning. The human technological singularity was nothing like anyone had predicted. It wasn't a sudden explosion of artificial intelligence. It was a collaborative evolution of human-machine symbiosis that defied all existing technological paradigms. Global communication networks began to transform. What had once been simple information highways became living, adaptive systems that could anticipate human needs before they were even articulated. Educational platforms rewrote themselves in real time, creating personalized learning experiences that adapted to individual cognitive patterns. On Earth, entire city infrastructures began to respond like living organisms. Transportation systems predicted and prevented congestion before it could occur. Energy grids became self-optimizing ecosystems that balanced resource distribution with near-perfect efficiency. The most profound changes happened in areas most civilizations considered impossible to predict. Climate restoration projects that had been stalled for generations suddenly found comprehensive solutions. Agricultural systems could now anticipate environmental changes centuries in advance, creating adaptive crop strategies that could feed entire planetary populations. Dr. Chen understood the deeper implication. This wasn't just technological advancement. It was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligence could operate. Galactic research institutions watched in a mixture of terror and fascination. The human approach to technological development was completely unlike anything they had encountered. Where other civilizations saw technology as a tool, humans were creating living, adaptive systems that seemed to breathe with potential. The quantum computation matrix completed its cycle. But this was no ordinary completion. The system had not just solved the problem. It had generated 17 additional potential solutions, each more innovative than the last. "We're not just developing technology," Dr. Nakamura said, her eyes reflecting the holographic displays. "We're teaching it to dream." Outside the orbital station, the stars seemed to pulse with a new kind of potential. Humanity had done more than advanced technology. They had transformed the very concept of technological progression. And this was just the beginning. The first human art installation arrived on the Centauri Prime without fanfare. A simple holographic sculpture that seemed to breathe with an impossible complexity, it appeared in the Central Cultural Museum almost overnight. Curator Zell Max approached the piece with professional skepticism. Alien art had always been a carefully curated experience, precise, controlled, representing the calculated aesthetic of entire civilizations. This was different. The sculpture wasn't static. It wasn't even truly a sculpture in the traditional sense. As viewers approached, it responded, not with programmed interactions, but with what could only be described as emotional resonance. Each observer saw something uniquely personal, yet universally connected. Young Centauri artists began to change. Their creative approaches shifted from rigid representational forms to something more fluid, more alive. They spoke of a new way of seeing, of understanding creativity as a living, breathing process rather than a final product. In the music halls of the Rigelian Harmonic Collective, composers discovered human musical compositions that defied everything they understood about sound and emotion. These weren't just songs. They were cognitive experiences that could make silicon-based life forms weep, that could translate complex emotional landscapes across species boundaries. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the cultural transmission specialist, had predicted this. Her research suggested that human creativity wasn't just an artistic expression. It was a form of communication that transcended traditional linguistic barriers. On a dozen different planets, something extraordinary began to happen. Children began asking different questions. Their play became more collaborative, more imaginative. Educational systems found themselves adapting to new learning models that emphasized creativity, empathy, and collective problem-solving. The Nebulon Philosophical Councils were the first to formally acknowledge the transformation. Their official statement sent shockwaves through galactic communication networks. Human cultural transmission is not colonization. It is an invitation to reimagine existence. Literature became something entirely new. Human narrative structures broke down traditional storytelling methods. Stories no longer had clear beginnings or endings. They became living ecosystems of experience, inviting readers to become active participants rather than passive observers. In the research archives of the Krell Max Preservation Society, historians noted a profound shift. It wasn't that human culture was replacing existing cultural frameworks. Something more nuanced was happening. Alien civilizations were finding new ways of understanding themselves through the lens of human creativity. An artist from the methane-based civilizations of the Outer Rim created a performance piece that could only be described as a living memorial to human imagination. It shifted and changed, incorporating the emotional experiences of its audience in real time. The most terrifying aspect for traditional galactic leadership was the complete lack of intent. Humans weren't trying to spread their culture. They were simply existing, creating, imagining, and in doing so, they were transforming everything they touched. Dr. Rodriguez understood the deeper implication. This wasn't cultural imperialism. This was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent species could communicate, could grow, could understand each other. As the sculpture in the Centauri Prime Museum continued to shift and breathe, curator Zell Max realized something profound. Humanity wasn't just sharing a culture. They were inviting the entire galaxy to reimagine what culture could be. And the galaxy was listening. Dr. Marcus Williams never intended to change the galaxy. His research began in the most mundane of circumstances, a late-night coffee-fueled session in a small university laboratory on the outskirts of New Santiago. What started as a theoretical model for collaborative problem-solving would become the most transformative technological protocol in galactic history. The initial breakthrough was almost accidental. Williams was studying complex systems management, drawing inspiration from everything from ant colony behaviors to quantum entanglement principles. His collaborative optimization protocols were designed to help struggling communities manage limited resources more effectively. The first test came unexpectedly. A small agricultural colony on the distant planet of Epsilon Indi 9 had been struggling with severe environmental challenges. Traditional terraforming methods had failed. Governmental support had been minimal. The colonists were on the brink of complete ecological collapse. When the first version of the protocol was implemented, nobody expected much. Williams himself was skeptical, watching the initial data streams with a mixture of academic curiosity and professional detachment. Within weeks, something extraordinary happened. The colonists began to work together in ways that defied traditional understanding of resource management. The optimization protocols didn't just suggest solutions. They created a collaborative framework that allowed each community member to contribute their unique skills and perspectives. Hydroponic systems were redesigned using insights from a former marine biologist working as a maintenance technician. Water reclamation strategies came from a retired environmental engineer who had previously been marginalized. The entire colony's approach to survival transformed from a top-down management model to a living, adaptive system. Dr. Elena Yoshida, who was monitoring the project from the Interstellar Research Station, watched in growing amazement. The protocols were doing something unprecedented. They were not just solving immediate problems, but creating a framework for continuous collaborative innovation. News spread quickly. Other struggling colonies began to implement the protocols. The results were consistently miraculous. Planets that had been considered essentially uninhabitable began to thrive. Resource-poor regions found innovative solutions to seemingly insurmountable challenges. The most profound impact was social. The protocols didn't just optimize resources, they fundamentally changed how communities understood collaboration. Hierarchical structures dissolved. Individual skills were valued in ways that traditional economic models had never achieved. Governments and corporate entities initially resisted. The protocols threatened existing power structures. They suggested a model of governance that was more fluid, more adaptive, more fundamentally democratic than anything that had existed before. But the people had already adopted the change. On planet after planet, communities began to reorganize themselves. Educational systems were transformed. Economic models were reimagined. The very concept of individual contribution was redefined. Dr. Williams watched all of this with a sense of bemused wonder. He had not set out to create a revolution. He had simply tried to solve a problem. In the research archives of the Galactic Collaborative Institute, his protocols would be studied for generations, not as a technological breakthrough, but as a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent species could work together. The revolution had begun, and it had started with a simple idea, that collective intelligence was humanity's most powerful resource. And this was just the beginning. The Krellnax battle fleet emerged from quantum translation space with devastating precision. Thousands of crystalline warships, each a monument to centuries of military engineering, positioned themselves with calculated menace around the human colony worlds. Their mission was clear: total eradication. Fleet Commander Zarek studied the human systems with a predatory confidence. The Krellnax had conquered civilizations older and more technologically advanced than humanity. Their military strategy was legendary, a perfect fusion of predictive algorithms and overwhelming force. What they didn't understand was that humanity had already changed the fundamental rules of engagement. The first wave of Krellnax quantum torpedoes should have obliterated entire planetary defense systems. Instead, they found themselves redirected, their destructive potential transformed into something entirely unexpected. Each weapon became a communication channel. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from the Interstellar Coordination Center. Her quantum redirection protocols, developed as a theoretical exercise in conflict resolution, were now being tested in the most extreme scenario imaginable. The Krellnax weapons didn't just fail. They began to transmit complex data streams that carried not threats, but understanding. mathematical models that showed the ultimate futility of their planned assault, emotional resonance patterns that suggested alternative paths to conflict resolution. Fleet Commander Zarek experienced something unprecedented. The human response wasn't defensive. It wasn't even reactive. It was transformative. Quantum communication channels opened, not as diplomatic channels, but as living bridges of understanding. The humans were doing something impossible. They were allowing the Krellnax to truly see the potential consequences of their actions. Entire battle strategies dissolved, not through destruction, but through comprehension. The Krellnax discovered something terrifying. The human colonies weren't just defending themselves. They were offering a collaborative solution that made the entire concept of military conquest obsolete. Planetary resource distribution models appeared. Collaborative governance frameworks materialized. Complex algorithms showed how the Krellnax's core motivations, territorial expansion, resource acquisition, species preservation, could be achieved through cooperation rather than destruction. It wasn't manipulation. It was an invitation. Within hours, what should have been a devastating military confrontation transformed into the most complex diplomatic engagement in galactic history. The Krellnax found themselves not defeated, but fundamentally changed. Commander Zarek transmitted the most difficult communication of his career. It wasn't a surrender. It was a request for dialogue. The human response was simple. "We've been waiting," came the transmission. "Let's solve this together." In the vast silence of space, something extraordinary happened. A civilization built on conquest discovered a new way of existing. The battle fleet that had come to destroy found itself being invited to collaborate. Humanity hadn't just defended itself, it had transformed the very concept of conflict. And this was just the beginning. Years after the transformative events that reshaped galactic civilization, Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the Interstellar Collaborative Research Station. The stars outside seemed different now, no longer just points of light, but living connections of potential and possibility. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had something far more profound. The Galactic Collaborative Council had become something unprecedented. No longer a rigid diplomatic structure, it was now a living network of shared understanding. Species that had been enemies for millennia now worked together on challenges that would have seemed impossible a generation ago. Planetary restoration projects transformed entire ecosystems. The Rigelian water reclamation techniques combined with human adaptive technologies had brought life back to planets once considered dead. The Nebulon atmospheric management systems, merged with human quantum prediction models, could now anticipate and prevent ecological catastrophes centuries in advance. It wasn't just technological advancement. It was a fundamental reimagining of collective intelligence. Dr. Rodriguez reviewed the latest collaborative research reports. A joint expedition comprised of scientists from 12 different species was preparing to explore a previously uncharted region of space. Their ship was a marvel of collaborative engineering, each system designed to leverage the unique capabilities of multiple civilizations. The communication protocols developed by humanity had become the standard for interstellar interaction. No longer were diplomatic exchanges rigid and formulaic. They were living, adaptive conversations that sought understanding rather than advantage. In research centers across multiple star systems, young scientists from different species worked together in ways that would have been unimaginable just decades earlier. The boundaries between species, between disciplines, between ways of thinking had become fluid and dynamic. The most profound change was philosophical. Civilizations had stopped seeing themselves as separate entities competing for limited resources. They had become a network, a living system of collective potential. Dr. Marcus Williams, now leading the Interstellar Collaborative Institute, often spoke about the true nature of their achievement. "We didn't solve problems," he would say. "We learned to see problems as opportunities for collective growth." The quantum neural interfaces that had once seemed like a radical experiment were now standard communication tools. They allowed for a depth of understanding that transcended language, biology, and individual experience. On Earth, in the small research station where many of these breakthroughs had begun, a new generation of scientists continued to push the boundaries of what was possible. They carried with them a fundamental understanding that the most powerful force in the universe was not technology, not military might, but the capacity to truly understand one another. As the observation deck's lights dimmed, Dr. Rodriguez smiled. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had invited the galaxy to reimagine itself. And somewhere, in a small laboratory, someone was already working on the next impossible breakthrough. The stars outside seemed to pulse with a new kind of potential, a potential that was only just beginning to be understood.